Hey everybody, welcome back to another week of the Site Owner Academy. My name is Dan Sfera. I've got Chris Sauber on. Chris, how are you doing this fine Thursday?
Yeah, doing well. Thank you for asking, Dan. Hopefully you're doing well as well. Enough wells there.
Yes, we could find out how to put one more well in that sentence.
Yeah, right.
Uh, yeah. So today in the Site Owner Academy, we always we have a weekly meeting with the Site Owner Academy students. But we always do Q&A at the end, but we're recording the presentation only. So if you're on YouTube and if you're on the podcast, you're just going to hear or see the presentation itself, not the QA. That's private. We want to keep the QA session private for the Site Owner Academy students. So with that being said, today's topic is going to be the different possible patient visits in most clinical research studies. Now, we say most because there are tons of clinical research studies, and these are all encompassed. It doesn't mean that all of these are going to be in every single study, but we're trying to be comprehensive as possible. So, the different possible patient visits in most clinical trials. Not a very long presentation, I think like 7 slides, which
Didn't we
actually
just
for us is kind of
sorry.
long.
Didn't we just do this recently?
No, I think we did a video on this that Carlos turned into
Uh,
slides for
uh,
the site
that would make
owners.
sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. So exactly, he was actually in that video. So go watch that one if you guys want like a unofficial one. This is the official one with bullet points and slides and everything. Uh, so the first visit, Chris, is the screening visits. Okay, every study is going to have a screening visit. Some studies will incorporate screening and randomization in the same visit. We'll talk about baseline and randomization visits a few slides from now.
Where
But screening visits is where it all starts.
where's this? There's oftentimes a pre-screening visit. Where's that?
Well, I guess we can talk about pre-screening first before we do screening. So what's pre-screening? Because technically, you're right, although it's not an official visit, but most sites do a pre-screening visit. So give us like a
Well,
walkthrough of what that is.
I don't know if I would frame it in that way. I think I've seen a couple of budgets recently in which they're paying for pre-screening, like it's kind of a visit in a way.
Wow,
Um,
okay. Yeah, you are the budget guy. I mean, you do literally all of our budgets in our site owner
yeah,
network and in the sites we own ourselves.
I was gonna pull up the one budget I'm thinking of, but I can't. I forgot I'm sharing my screen. So, um,
Okay.
but I'm pretty sure there was a budget just recently in which they're paying for it's pre-screening then screening.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, we don't want to share that budget with the world. It's
yeah,
just the
right.
world.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I could be mistaken. That's why I wanted to pull it up. But so with pre-screening, oftentimes you might have like a facility consent potentially, um, but oftentimes there is no consent signed for the pre-screening visit.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of going over the study, discussing it a little bit. You're not gathering any data or information really from the subject in terms of study. There's no
Hmm.
procedures or anything of that nature. It's just a matter of kind of getting a rough estimate on whether or not they qualify.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's a good thing you mentioned this because I think most sites need to do pre-screening visits. And like you said, some studies there's actually an official pre-screening visit.
Right.
But even if there's not, it's not a bad idea for sites to do a pre-screening visit. Why? So you don't waste your time and resources on an actual screening visit if you can, somehow exclude them over the phone. If they are excluded, you can discover that they are uh, maybe that they don't meet an inclusion exclusion criteria or something. And
Hmm.
pre-screenings is something that really like entry level people can do in research. I mean, if you give somebody a list of like basic questions to ask during a pre-screening visit, which by the way, now that gets into, well, does the pre-screening questionnaire need to be IRB approved? The textbook answer is yes. The practical answer is it depends on what you ask. So,
Hmm.
do you want to get into that? Because that could be a topic on its own.
No, that's you're right. That could be a different, a
That
whole
could be an
different.
entire another section. Maybe we'll do
Yeah,
that next.
yeah.
Okay,
So,
so either way, it's a good entry level position to do pre-screening. You can actually, I just did a video on this yesterday for people trying to break in, and Chris. I don't even think you know. I'm going to do a video called "Comprehensive Guide to Breaking into the Industry." It's going to
oh,
be like kind of like our site owner. You know, the 2 hour prezzies we did. I'm going to do a prezzy. It's only going to be like half an hour though. I'll probably do it today or tomorrow, maybe next week
oh, very nice.
sometime. So, but one of the things is pre-screening, like become a patient recruiter, and essentially you're going to be somewhat pre-screening, maybe not as thorough as the study coordinator, but you are going to be doing some level of pre-screening. So it's good to mention pre-screening visits as well. So
Hmm.
thank you for bringing that up, Chris. I also was thinking of that as I saw this slide. So, but Carlos did a great job once again. Uh,
Always.
Always. I don't even need to see. Yeah, I just know he did a good job. So, screening visits. Each study has different varying study requirements for screening visits. One thing that remains constant is the informed consent form, which must be signed prior to screening. So, this is correct. The first thing at any screening visit should be the informed consent. Okay, the PI should also review the inclusion-exclusion criteria, medical history, and vitals in order to determine if the patient is a good fit for the study. Also, the study coordinator needs to be doing this as well to double check everything the PI is doing, or to let the PI know that this is what they need to do. This is what a study coordinator's job is, not necessarily to do the inclusion-exclusion criteria, but to double check it and or to remind the PI to do it, or the sub-I to do it, or whomever is delegated to do the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Very important. Then the screening visits can be split up into different days. So we go to the next slide. Moving right along here. So, oh, Carlos did put pre-screening visits. Okay, visits related to screening visit is the aforementioned pre-screening visit. So prior to the actual screening visit, these are also common. General patient information can be collected to identify potential patients. Then you have a run-in period, which is after the screening visit. Not always, but some studies have a run-in period, which allows patients to either wash off of a medication or to titrate on a medication or to be put on a medication gradually. It all depends on the study drug and the study design. But
Hmm.
just know that there could be a run in period. Um, Not always, but often. Often.
Hmm.
And this data can be used to determine patient eligibility at a later visit. So um, you have pre-screening, then you have screening, then you might have a run-in period or a washout period, uh, and then a randomization. So we go to the next slide, which is baseline and randomization, which are synonymous. Okay, they're used interchangeably for visits in which patients are assigned to a treatment arm. Um, so what's the reason for the different terminology here for baseline and randomization? People might be asking, Chris. 'Cause I have a
Well,
few thoughts.
so randomization would be when you are randomized to whatever study arm, right? Baseline, I guess, could be where you start your comparison of data. So it wouldn't make sense in my mind to have it different from randomization, but I guess it could be.
hmm So yeah, randomization I think has to do with always with double blinded and when IP is randomly assigned.
It's
So when
initiated.
there's different treatment arms, and baseline could be an open label study, right? It's just the first visit where you're actually starting to measure
Data.
after screening, starting to measure some data, right? So
Yep.
That's why I think the different terminologies, but they both are used interchangeably all the time.
Right.
So no wonder people get confused in this industry, but we're here to clear that up for you. Okay.
Mm, as best we can.
Yeah, we try. PI must make a determination about patient eligibility during this visit based on protocol criteria. It's essentially, in most studies, just like the screening visit, except you are seeing if they're actually going to be eligible once again, and if they are, you will possibly assign study drug um, using an IWRS system, most likely. So, an interactive web response system, which will randomly place patients into their treatment arm. Okay, this is how randomization happens, is through this IWRS, which is completely automated. The coordinator or the PI simply logs in, clicks on the subject that is there for the baseline visit or randomization visit, however you want to call it, and the system asks if they're eligible to continue. Should they be randomized? You click yes, and they will generate a number which corresponds to one of the IP bottles or blister packs or vials or whatever the IP is in the locked study drug room. And then the coordinator will go get that, will go match that number to the actual bottle, blister pack, etc., and bring it out to the patient. Right? Am I missing
Yep.
anything?
Nope.
So that's randomization, made really easy and condensed into one slide. It's always nice to keep things simple. Regular study visits. Okay, so after pre-screening, then screening, then washout or run-in, and then baseline/randomization, you've got the regular study visits, right? So, what do you have to say about these ones, Chris?
Yeah, it's where you're gathering the data for comparison again to baseline. Baseline being prior to initiation of IP, and then regular study visits are the ongoing. Well, I don't want to use the word, but experimentation of the IP. Right, we're seeing how it affects, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily have to be a drug. It could be a device. It could be It could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're seeing how it affects the individual, gathering that data.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes on for as long as the study design is. I mean, some studies it's fairly short, and others it's fairly long. I've seen studies where it's 10 years. I'm sure there's even longer.
Right. Oh
So,
yeah, there's some studies that go on until the patient dies. I mean,
yep,
could
yep.
be decades before their regular study visits are over. However, patient can withdraw from a study anytime
Hmm.
as well. So it's up to the patient how long they want to go. It's also could be up to the PI and the sponsor. If they want to terminate the patient early, they will. For whatever reasons, we're going to get into some of those visits later. But yeah, regular study visits, I mean, pretty self-explanatory. Also, very much dependent on the protocol and study design. Patients will be seen throughout the study. Like Chris mentioned, these visits allow the PI to monitor the patient's response to the study drug, efficacy, and safety. Uh, the data from regular study visits can be used by sponsors to make decisions regarding study drugs' effectiveness and safety. There might be serious adverse events or regular adverse events reported during these visits. Um, During specific visits and crossover studies, some patients may be placed on a different treatment arm. So that's where it gets a little bit complicated in these crossover studies. Um, and they'll be blinded. So if a study is designed to where patient, once they randomize, they get assigned to either the experimental drug or the standard of treatment, uh, at a certain point in the study, based on the design, the treatments will switch. But remember, everyone's usually blinded, so nobody knows which one they're getting because nobody knows which medication or which treatment arm the patients are currently in. But they do cross over. and sometimes they'll cross over back again. Um, if you see crossover in a study, that's what that means. If you see parallel, it means that there is no crossover. It's just either the experimental drug or the comparator drug. If you see crossover, just know every patient, if they make it to the crossover point, will be switched to the other treatment arm. That's an easy way to remember that one.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting the way they design these things. And Chris, I'm teaching for a group, a pharmaceutical group in Korea, and I'm the CRA instructor. But they actually have people who design protocols teaching classes too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to attend those classes just to learn a little bit more about study design and particularly how to do it.
Will those classes be in Korean?
No, they're in English. They're in
Oh,
English.
okay.
Yeah, the instructors are English, and the most of the students are from our drug companies from Korea. But they all speak English, fluent English.
Oh, okay.
But they're starting to get more U.S. people in their classes too. Anyone interested, message me about that. So non-study visits. Well, take it away, Chris. This is your favorite.
It is? You're making awfully large assumptions there.
I think if I remember correctly from our video, you had a lot to say here.
I did? Maybe I brought it up. If I recall correctly, we had skipped over unscheduled visits. Let's see, non-study visits. So unscheduled visits are not part of the scheduled protocol of visits, but may occur for many reasons. Common reasons for these visits include labs are inconclusive, SAE, AE monitoring, or PI request. So a good example, an often unscheduled visit would be something peculiar comes back with the patient's labs, and they want to know right away if this is continuing before the patient's next scheduled visit, according to protocol.
Hmm.
So you'll bring the patient back as soon as possible to redo their labs. That's, in my experience, that's the most common reason for an unscheduled visit is to redo the labs. But it could be for any number of reasons, as it
Right.
mentions here. And
Could be
then,
for anything, right? It could even be like patient. It could even be like patient was in the area and wasn't feeling well and stopped by, and
sure,
then stopped by the clinic. So technically, it's an unscheduled visit.
yep, absolutely. And then lost to follow up, not a true visit, but must also be documented. So not a true visit, but must also be documented. Any patient that is unresponsive or can't be found is considered lost to follow up. And when you have a lost to follow up patient, usually you also want to see if you can find them at their last known address. So either mail or go over there personally. Um, I think we often send a certified letter to show
Yeah,
that we tried to get to them. And I think that's kind
certified
of
letter, certified letter to try to get the drug back. Because remember, for everyone listening and watching, if a patient just doesn't show up anymore, they most likely have been assigned drug that they have. And so the certified letter is not only to get a hold of them to come in to request a safety follow-up visit, or an early termination visit, which you'll see soon, but also to retrieve the IP is very
Mhm.
important. So, especially if it's a controlled substance like the DEA, you want to have documentation of a certified letter and 3 attempts that are documented, of like phone call or email or something to get a hold of the patient. It has to be all documented. Has to be
Yep.
documented, or it didn't happen. Now, why does it say not a true visit? Because some people are going to be confused when it says lost to follow up, not a true visit.
That's not a visit at all. So this is just a matter of the status of the patient within the study. Um, it's not a visit. I don't know why I would say not a true visit. It's not a visit at all. It's just the
Hmm.
pace, the categorization of the patient. They've been lost to follow up. They cannot, they can no longer be found.
Right.
Um, so it's not a visit.
Yeah, I think in the source documents, it will have a separate tab called lost to follow up, just like any regular visit. So maybe that's why, they're treating it like a visit, even though it's not really a visit
Sure.
because it's still documented. like a visit would be documented. It's the same thing, but it's not actually, there's no patient visiting the
Right.
site. It's all documentation on the site's part to try to get a hold of the patient.
Fair enough.
Very good. Very good. Very clear, Chris. And I believe this is the last slide, guys. So thank you for staying with us. So other visits. Oh no, this is the slide in the video that you had a lot to say. But I mean, you can take it away if you want, or I can do it. There's a lot to say here about early termination, completion visits, safety follow-up visits. I mean, where do you want to start here?
You've already started.
We already started on the previous slide. So basically, like I mentioned, a patient can withdraw from a study at any time. If they withdraw earlier than the study is designed for the patients to complete, it's called an early termination visit. It's strictly for safety follow-up, and it's strictly to collect any unused investigational product back from the patient, as well as any patient-reported outcomes like diaries, if they have an electronic diary, or if they have a paper diary. Those things are to be returned. Also, if they have any other equipment that they need to return to the site, and just for a safety follow-up, right? And it should be documented that the patient will be referred back to their primary care physician for further follow-up. If the PI is the primary care, I think they should still document it in their notes, both for the research and for the practice, that the patient is now out of the study officially and back in the care of traditional medicine and not research, not experimental. So that's an early termination visit or a completion visit. It's the exact same thing, except it's when the study design calls for the visit to be the completion visit, when the
They
end
made
of
it to the
treatment
end.
visit. They made it to the end of the game. Okay. And the final, it's these, no matter which one it is, early term or completion visit or end of treatment visits, it's the final visit for the patients. Patients will typically discontinue study drugs at this point and be prescribed whatever their doctor or clinician thinks is appropriate. Safety follow-up visits occur after the patient's last visit and are important to see if patients have experienced any changes to their health after discontinuing the study drug. Most studies have a safety follow-up visit after the completion visit. It's usually just a follow-up phone call asking the patient, hey, have you had any more AEs? I noticed this a lot in oncology studies where they're trying to get endpoints, particularly progression of the disease or even death, maybe in some cases, from the family. So you see this a lot in oncology, but just about in any study as well. But in oncology, you see a lot. Is it progressive disease? Is it stable disease? Is it a partial response, complete response? These are important for follow-up visits, and sometimes they're more formal than just a phone call. They are like a tumor assessment, but since the patient's not in a study anymore, it's just standard of treatment, but you're just following up, like a for basically for good clinical practice, which says to put the safety of the patient first. So it's a first priority. Not all studies have this, but a lot do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. I think that's it.
You would be correct,
So
sir.
thank you guys for watching and listening. And we're gonna go back to the Site Owner Academy